So WWE presented Backlash this year from Lyon, France, another international pay-per-view of many for 2024, and it looks like that's what they're going to do with their B-level pay-per-views going forward. I thought the show was pretty solid. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that really stunk up the place. And so I wanted to give my brief thoughts on each match, and then the main thing that people seem to take away from the overall event in the end. The first match was Kevin Owens and Randy Orton versus Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga. This was just supposed to be a regular tag match, and they started brawling before the match began, and then Nick Aldis came out and changed it to a street fight, which is a good thing because, look, if you've got Kevin Owens being dragged out, bloodied from getting beat down by Tama Tonga, it kind of necessitates that this becomes something more than just a regular tag match. And so that allowed these guys to just kind of go all out and play to the crowd. And it was the kind of aggression that was needed in a feud like this. But anyhow, the Bloodline won. They debuted Tama Tonga's brother, Tonga Loa, which is a nice little surprise because everyone thought it was going to be Jacob Fatu. And for me, the highlight of this match, it wasn't even the match at all. It's really Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman is a treasure to watch because his facial reactions, his expressions are just gold. And so him trying to kind of play up and act like he's down with the new bloodline, meanwhile, he's just absolutely terrified by what Solo is doing, to me is the only thing that's making this new part of the bloodline story interesting. I'm really just not nearly as engaged with this. And I think part of the problem is Solo Sikoa is not someone that I take seriously. And no, not because he lost all those matches on house shows. They didn't build him up very well to lead to this part of the story. They did initially, but now you're having me believe that he can be this kind of leader of the new bloodline while answering to someone in the shadows. Like it just doesn't work out all that well. And they're going to have to do something over the summer. If they're going to lead into War Games with The Rock coming back and Solo being the de facto leader until The Rock does, they've got to build him and the others up, because otherwise Roman and the Usos, who will probably get back together pretty soon, are just going to run over them. No one's going to take the other team seriously. So anyhow, next match, the women's championship match. Kind of a rough start. Naomi was kind of slow to a few spots, but they eventually got it together. And I thought all three girls put in a solid effort. It's obvious they want to protect Tiffany Stratton since she didn't take the pin. And where this leaves Naomi, I have no idea. I'm not a fan of Naomi hugging Bayley at the end of this match. I don't care how friendly you are. You are in the match because you want to win, not because you want to hug. And so I hope that this leads to a heel turn for her, because she's just kind of spinning in circles at this point. And while she's stuck in limbo, it's obvious that they're trying to figure out a way to get that belt on Tiffany Stratton, probably by the end of the summer. I would not be surprised if Tiffany Stratton is not in a match with Bayley, probably around SummerSlam time. They want that belt on her. They have high hopes for her in the division. Next match, we've got the World Heavyweight Championship match between Jey Uso and one Damian Priest. The crowd probably gave Jey Uso one of the top 10 entrances I've ever seen. I loved the crowd when it came to the entrances. I'll talk more about them after this here, but this was an all-timer for me. It was an amazing entrance, and then the bell rang. I am not a fan of Jey Uso after his entrance. I think he's incredibly boring in the ring. I think he is better as a tag team wrestler. Ditto for Jimmy. And Damian can work well in the ring, but he needs the right opponent. I don't think Jey is that person. But look, Jey is incredibly over. Doesn't really matter how good in the ring he is. When you're incredibly over, you don't have to do too many things. But he relies on the super kick way too much, and the match was just a little bit slow, kind of choppy. The crowd filled in the gaps as they did throughout the show. But once again, the most interesting thing to me about this match wasn't the match at all. It was kind of the post-match angle. The Judgment Day, Finn and JD came down and tried to interfere. And eventually, after enough interference, Priest was able to land a South of Heaven chokeslam off the middle rope and pin Jey Uso, and Priest retains the title. But after the match, Priest is not happy with JD or Finn, and he pushes them around. He tells them, "What are you doing?" And so it's obvious that once again they're teasing a breakup with the Judgment Day. But I feel like we've been down this road so many times. Who knows if they'll actually pull the trigger? Moving on to the women's tag match. Now, this is the match that got the most criticism, and justifiably so. It was the worst match on the card. I thought that it had a solid start. And as usual, they have Bianca kind of playing, the heavy. She goes out there, she takes most of the hits and the damage, and then she tries to build up to the hot tag to Jade. And that's how they played this match off. The problem here is that once Jade got in the ring, she started off okay, but then there was some miscommunication between the ref and Kyrie. And at that point, Jade was completely lost. The script was thrown out the window, and she didn't know what to do. And her inexperience very much showed. Look, she'll hopefully get better. I don't put all of this on her. I think the ref and Kyrie, I don't know if it was because the crowd was so loud that they just didn't know what was supposed to be happening, but there's blame to go around. But credit to all of them. They got everything back on track. And Jade finished off Kyrie with probably one of the most impressive finishers, or at least finishing sequences I've seen in a long time. She caught Kyrie off the second rope in a hurricanrana position, transitioned to an electric chair, popped her up, grabbed her, hooked her, and then gave her the jaded. And then that should have been the finish, but I guess they had to get Bianca to do the KOD on Asuka, onto Kyrie, and then Bianca makes the cover. It was so unnecessary. They should have just finished it with the jaded, but whatever. 1, 2, 3, new tag champs, and we'll see where we go from here with Jade. I think she's getting better despite what happened in this match. She's able to be in the ring a little bit longer and not just for the hot tag, a few moves, and then tag back out. She's had a couple of matches since then on TV where I think she's showing improvement. And look, hopefully they've got her with Bianca to kind of hide her shortcomings. Eventually they'll get her to where they want her to be so that she can have big time matches with Bianca, Stratton, Charlotte Flair down the line. So yeah, the worst match on the card, but it was still okay. The next match, which was the main event, the Undisputed Championship between one Mr. Cody Rhodes and one Mr. AJ Styles, who apparently have never been in the ring together as far as opponents. I didn't know that. Maybe I could have sworn I've seen them in the ring against each other, but I guess they never have been. But this match kind of gave you a blueprint of what Cody Rhodes' reign is going to look like over the next few months. Just get him in the ring, get him clean wins over credible and quality opponents. That's all they really are going to do, it seems like, for the next few months. There was a report that Dave Meltzer put out saying that they didn't have plans for Cody, like solid plans post WrestleMania. And look, I don't know whether to believe that or not, but it sure does seem like that might be true. You think like the first few weeks post WrestleMania, Cody just came out and talked and cut promos. And, he didn't, he had matches, but there's no feud building up with anyone in particular. And even this feud with AJ Styles was simply the result of AJ winning a number one contenders match. So I don't know what they do with Cody. It seems like they're just trying to get him to SummerSlam so that he can have his big payoff, whether it's against The Rock or someone else. But it would seem like it would have to be The Rock. Although I'm hearing that they have plans for Cody and Rock at next year's WrestleMania, which I think that's a mistake. I don't know if you can keep Cody Rhodes interesting for an entire year. I know that he sells a lot of merch. I know that the crowd loves to go whoa and with this song, but I just don't think Cody Rhodes is someone that can remain interesting for an entire year with that championship. And so if you want to have him go against The Rock at SummerSlam, I think that's a better spot for him. Now, this whole idea of it being a championship versus people's championship, I think is utterly stupid. I think that's Rock's ego at play. There's nothing valuable about that belt that Rock has. The people's championship, the idea that the family gave it to him. I'm like, where did this come from? Really? It's just so that Rock could have a belt to walk down to the ring with. I don't believe that for a second, that this was something that the Ali family decided, like, yeah, we want to give you this belt now all of a sudden, just whatever. But I'm kind of off topic here. The match itself was really good. It was really solid between the two. They probably one of the better wrestling matches that WWE has had in a few months. So many of their matches are more about the spectacle than the actual match itself. But these guys put on a pretty solid show, and so I don't really have any complaints here. Cody wins with one crossroads, which that might have been the biggest surprise in the match. Seemingly needs two or three of them to beat people, but one did it. I still think that is one of the worst finishers in all of wrestling. The crossroads is... your top guy has something that looks more like a signature move or a regular move, but that's his finish. And even Roman, they tried to bury it with Roman back at WrestleMania, saying that can't finish anyone. And he was right. It took three, not one. So I don't know, but there's nothing they can do about it now. That's his finish, and it's been his finish for a while. So, but overall, a solid show. That was it. 5 matches, 3 hours, or a little less than 3 hours. A very easy watch, but like I said, none of the matches were like just out of this world, and then I wouldn't say that any of them just sucked, which left the real story coming out of Backlash being the crowd. And everyone loved the crowd. And look, I am in the extreme minority. I know I'm going to get some kickback on this. I didn't care for the crowd. I thought that the crowd was really good for the entrances. But then the match started and their participation was just a little too much for me. You ever been to a live event and there's always this guy, and it's always a guy, who's trying his damnedest to get everyone's attention? Like, he starts chants, he makes silly noises, he's hoping that someone will respond and notice him. The crowd in Lyon, France reminded me of that guy times 11,000. Look, I enjoy the noise, the chants, the sing-alongs, and everything else that surrounds the entrances. And like I said, Jey Uso's entrance in particular is going to go down as one of the greatest entrances I've ever seen. But once the matches began, the crowd just seemed hell-bent on making sure that there was no dead air and no time to really absorb what was happening in the ring, for the most part. Now, look, I know that when there was a 2 count, they would often say only 2 in French. But then they just kept going and repeating it over and over again after every 2 count. And I was like, okay, enough. I like that the crowd is engaged, but I just don't like it when a crowd is seemingly overwhelming the match or taking away from what's happening in the ring. And I understand it's also subjective. But for me, a crowd should enhance the experience of watching a match, not become the center of the experience when watching a match, if that makes sense. To me, like, a good crowd is like a great musical score that follows the ebb and flow of a good action scene. It's always present, and then you hear those drums and horns start to really hit at the right moments. And I think of matches like Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13, or The Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania 18, how those crowds had an audible buzz throughout, and then they rose to their feet, or they cheered, or they booed. They hit all the right moments. Everything was earned. And even when things died down, you could still hear them in the background, but they weren't drowning out what was happening in the ring. I think of a more recent example. Think of the Bloodline segments, especially the ones with Sami Zayn. You remember that one where Sami and Jay had to work out their differences in the ring while Roman stood silent in the middle? And the crowd was hanging on every word. You could hear them, but you could also hear Jay and Sami just as well. They weren't drowning out the dialogue. And then came that moment where Sami said, "The tribal chief wants peace." And then Jey Uso quickly responded, "I don't give a damn what the tribal chief says." And then immediately you heard the oohs and the ahs of the crowd. The place erupted. And that was, to me, an example of a segment that was enhanced by the crowd. Imagine if all they were doing for that entire segment was just chanting various things. I think it would have ruined the segment. I don't think the segment would have come off nearly as well. But look, the French have been starved of WWE entertainment, so it shouldn't be a surprise that they were highly engaged, given the fact that they're inclined to act like this at their sporting events, especially football, from what I come to understand. This is who they are. And despite the fact that I didn't care for it, there is no right or wrong way to engage with the WWE product. I am but one person. It is just my opinion. In no way would I tell crowds, international crowds, hey, you need to do it this way. I just didn't care for it. That's all. I fully expect that when they go back overseas to Glasgow and maybe not so much Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia tends to be a little bit quiet. But when they go back over to Europe in particular, we're going to get similar crowds, similar reactions. It's not for me. The thing that bothered me, though, was not necessarily their reaction. As I said before, there's no right or wrong way to do this. What bothered me was people using this to kind of indict American crowds. And you got a lot of people kind of getting on their high horse telling the American crowds that they need to step up. They need to do better. Look, I'm not going to act like we don't have our fair share of dead crowds who seem to be more occupied by what's happening on their phones than what's happening in the ring. But I'm also not going to act like WWE has given American crowds a lot to cheer about on a weekly basis. I mean, I want you to pause for a second. Ask yourself, how many times has a match put you on the edge of your seat that's elicited a reaction that would wake up your neighbors, or made you stop and say, "Damn, this is some really good storytelling." Like you were up out of your seat, you were yelling, you were screaming, you were chanting. How many times has a match done that for you recently with WWE? Probably not too many. And when one does come along, then the crowd usually responds in kind. It's not like American crowds or crowds on this side of the pond, so to speak, don't know how to react. But when you are a product that travels the American cities year after year, decade after decade, and we've been there and done that with so many things, and you're seeing the same matches, the same storyline beats, the same segments over and over again, do you really expect us to be as excited and energetic as Lyon, France? Look, Backlash was WWE essentially saying we can put anything out there and they will give us that kind of reaction. They could have had the wrestlers come out to the ring, pull out some tables and chairs, sit down and play poker, and the crowd would have ate it up. Backlash was a lazy show. There wasn't a whole lot of storyline going into Backlash, outside of maybe the bloodline stuff. And even that, I'm not all that particularly engaged or interested in right now. They gave you 5 matches, less than 3 hours, which, look, that's not a bad thing. Less than 3 hour show, that's not a bad thing at all. But they gave you 5 matches, little build, with a group of wrestlers that they knew could go out there and give you solid matches. Almost a guarantee. Outside of Jade, every one of those wrestlers in those matches all knew what they were doing. All experienced. And Tiffany is just kind of a prodigy at this point. So they knew what they were doing. They knew they didn't have to put that much effort into it. Do you really think that they could have given an American audience that show and that we would have given them that same kind of reaction? Would it have been deserved? We wouldn't have. But it's also fascinating to me that some of the same people who are telling us Americans to do better are the same internet wrestling commentators who every week dissect these shows and tell us how boring they are or how hard it is to stay awake during these shows. These are the same people telling us that as crowds we need to do better, yet they themselves admit the shows aren't that much aren't all that exciting. So the reality here is it's not the crowds that need to do better. It's WWE that needs to do better. Like I said, it's easy to go overseas and get loud, sustained reactions from wrestling-starved crowds. But WWE takes its fans for granted. And it can easily control the narrative and present this idea that, hey, you fans are spoiled and you just don't know what good entertainment is. No, we know what good entertainment is. You just don't always provide it. So I would say coming out of this show, the story needs to be, hey, WWE, don't forget that it takes a little bit more than the effort that you put into Backlash to elicit a decent reaction. It's unrealistic to expect American audiences to start chanting during a headlock or reacting after every 2 count or making noise just because 2 wrestlers are staring each other in the ring. You know, even under this new leadership of Triple H, there are more events that leave little reason to get excited, or at least as excited as the crowd in Lyon. WWE has to do more than simply show up. And you, the consumer, should not feel compelled to cheer or boo just because everyone loved the energetic crowd in France. As I said before, WWE has been traveling through America, putting on the same shows, retelling the same stories, having these 3 to 5 minute matches for years. I, for one, will not apologize that it takes a little bit more to excite the average fan. WWE still has to earn our reaction. And those are my thoughts on Backlash. Let me know what you think down in the comments. This is a new channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll catch you in the next video.